Hey guys, tonight we travel back to the glittering yet muddy boulevards of early 19th century France, where soldiers march, lovers pine, and one slightly too tight hat may or may not alter the course of European history. It's a tale of ambition, love, military fashion, and mild cranial discomfort. You probably won't survive this one, not because of battle wounds, but because of second-hand embarrassment from watching a world-conquering emperor wrestle with millinery. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment below with your location and the local time. I always love seeing how far this sleepy little corner of the internet reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins, like all great tragedies, with a hat. You are a courier, making your way down a misty Parisian alley in the spring of 1806. You carry an oblong box wrapped in oilskin and stamped with an imperial seal. Inside it, nestled among layers of starched muslin and a worried note, is a custom bicorn hat, commissioned for Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, stitched by one of the city's most daring and discreet milliners. It smells faintly of starch and pride. It's not your job to know anything about hats, but you do glance at the note. It reads, "To His Excellency. Please note, sizing is requested, though we advise a modest stretch may occur over time. Regards M. Leclerc." The signature curls nervously. You wonder if milliners usually add disclaimers. You shrug and deliver it. In the private wing of the Tuileries Palace, Napoleon is pacing. He's already worn out one pair of slippers on the polished marble floor and is now down to socks and political anxiety. A new hat has been promised. A special one. Measured to his specifications, precise ones, of course. You hand it over without fanfare. He opens the box with a mixture of skepticism and hope, like a man receiving a gift from a cousin he doesn't trust. His fingers trace the clean line of the felt, the sharp angle of the corners. He lifts it. He nods, satisfied. Then, the moment of truth. He slides it on. And pauses. Because it's tight. Not laughably so, not painful, but just enough that his eyebrows twitch upward in immediate judgment. He adjusts. Wiggles. Pushes it slightly forward. Slightly back. The edge presses along the temple. A gentle squeeze. Like a distant, pressing thought that refuses to leave. Still, he says nothing. You're dismissed. He keeps the hat on for precisely 9 minutes, walking from mirror to mirror. He turns left. Turns right. The bicorn casts a noble silhouette, aggressive, angular, unmistakably imperial. But the fit, it hugs too close. Clings to the crown like a jealous lover. Now, let's pause for a quick historical breath. Napoleon famously wore his bicorn sideways, a fashion now iconic and used across pop culture to signify short man with big ambitions. Historians still argue whether the sideways look was a stylistic innovation or simply an easier way to spot him on a battlefield. But one thing's agreed upon, the man took his hat seriously. And this one? It has opinions. That night, during a private dinner with trusted advisors, Napoleon keeps the hat nearby on a polished walnut side table. It looms. Even when he's not wearing it, you can. Over the following days, Napoleon wears the hat in public appearances. The people cheer, though more for the military parade and less for his headwear, but keen observers note a shift in expression. A little more pinched. A little less swagger. One pamphlet published in an anti-Bonapartist cafe whispers, "L'Emperor marches with great resolve." Or perhaps a headache. Back in the palace, Leclerc the milliner receives no feedback. Which, he suspects, is worse than insult. Silence, after all, is the sound of a client thinking very hard about revenge. To be clear, the hat is beautifully made. Elegant. Balanced. Trimmed in black silk with understated braiding. Even a small lining of goosefeather tufting beneath the crown for comfort. And yet it grips. A little too snug at the temples. A little too precise at the back. No room for swelling thought. And here's the thing, Napoleon won't get rid of it. Maybe it's stubbornness. Maybe he believes the discomfort keeps him sharp. Maybe it's symbolic, a crown of cloth for a man who crowned himself emperor. Or maybe, just maybe, it's because replacing it would admit fallibility, and fallibility is not something you accessorize with. Historians still argue whether the infamous tight hat truly existed or if it's simply the stuff of memoir embellishment, pulled from footnotes, and folded into lore. But the Leclerc hat remains a recurring footnote in letters, journals, and even paintings where Napoleon's expression betrays a touch of constraint. In portraits from this period, if you look closely, the angle of the bicorn shifts ever so slightly upward, an attempt, perhaps, to give his skull some air. In one painting by a little-known artist from Lyon, you can even spot a faint red line across Napoleon's forehead, suspiciously hat-shaped. You won't find this detail in textbooks, of course. But it's there. A quiet tension beneath the fabric. A tale of conquest, not of nations, but of comfort. And so, with that slight pressure always present, Napoleon marches forward. To battles. To courts. To romantic letters scribbled under candlelight. All beneath a hat just half a centimeter too tight. You wouldn't think that's enough to influence history. But as we'll see, it just might be. The morning fog clings low along the Alps as you trudge through packed snow and boots still damp from the last frost. Around you, soldiers mutter to themselves and to their horses, cursing the incline, the chill, and the fact that their emperor insists on leading from the front, even on a Tuesday. You look up, and there he is, Napoleon Bonaparte, silhouette framed against the sunrise, astride a well-groomed horse and, more notably, sporting the new bicorn hat. It's perched there, tilted slightly forward today, as if trying to escape his forehead entirely. The shape is familiar, iconic even, but you notice him shift in the saddle and gently tug at the brim every few paces. He's not cold. He's not distracted. He's just pressed. That's because this is the first military campaign where Napoleon chooses to wear the new hat. The infamous slightly too tight version, delivered with craftsmanship and unintended psychological warfare stitched into every thread. Now, this alpine pass isn't a place that encourages subtlety. It's sharp-edged rock, ice, and goat droppings. Soldiers are hungry. The wind slices rather than blows. And yet, whispers begin among the ranks. Not about battle strategy or supply lines, no. About the hat. It's new, right? Looks tighter. Did his head get larger? They don't say it loudly, of course. You don't insult an emperor's circumference. But there's murmuring, like cautious snowflakes swirling into gossip. Historians still argue whether the particular cut of this bicorn was actually designed for long-distance campaign wear. Some claim it was optimized for ceremonial posture, not battlefield grit. Others say Napoleon requested a smaller fit himself. Tightness, they argue, kept his thoughts contained. Contained thoughts. The man's planning troop movements across frozen terrain while dealing with mild scalp compression. It's around this time Napoleon begins developing what soldiers call his marching tilt. It starts subtly, a slight inclination of the head, meant perhaps to relieve the pressure on his temple, or to avoid the inner rim scraping against his hairline. But then it lingers. Drawings from this campaign show Napoleon angled ever so slightly to the left. Not dramatically. Not enough to startle. Just a degree or two off level, like a painting hung on a wall that no one dares straighten. One soldier writes in his journal. The general appears focused and skewed. Like a brilliant thought caught in a sideways jar. On the fourth evening, you're stationed near the main tent when Marshal Lannes approaches you with a quiet grunt. He's been dispatched to deliver a message to the Emperor, and he doesn't look thrilled about it. He's in one of his moods, Lannes mutters, and the hat is still involved. Inside, you hear Napoleon pacing. Not in the wide, decisive arcs of command, but in small, tight circles, like a man orbiting his own irritation. He finally steps out into the chill, shoulders squared, eyes steely. He speaks to no one in particular. This mountain is no match for French resolve. There is a polite pause. Also, he adds, tugging at the hat again, no one touched the fire. The felt reacts poorly to heat. Ah yes, the felt. An important historical aside, Napoleon's bicorns were famously made from black beaver felt, trimmed with silk and often lined with cotton or padded leather. But this particular version? A new supplier had opted for a dense wool blend with less give. Durable, handsome, and slightly unyielding, like Napoleon himself, ironically. Still, no one dares mention the tension gathering just above his ears. Instead, the army climbs. They march under freezing skies, clambering up rocky trails and wondering if their commander's silence is strategic or simply hat-induced. And then, on the 7th morning, it happens. They reach a pass, scouted and seemingly clear. The mist parts. The air stills. Napoleon raises a spyglass to his eye. And winces. You don't see it right away, but then he shifts his grip and angles the glass slightly lower than usual. He's squinting. Not out of suspicion. Not to focus. But because the hat is now pressing downward, forcing his brow into a semi-permanent furrow. And so, the Emperor adjusts. He tilts his head, not in grand, sweeping analysis, but in a minor, practical motion, just enough to take pressure off his left orbital ridge. He interprets the scene before him. And gives an order. And that's how the army spends the next 2 days maneuvering around a slope that, historians later confirm, was entirely imaginary. They went the long way. Twice. The cause? Possibly fog. Possibly fatigue. Possibly a hat that compressed just enough to skew perception by a few degrees. Which, when you're navigating an alpine pass with thousands of troops, matters. Now, no one blames the hat officially. That would be absurd. But in one of the rear camps, a satirical song starts making the rounds. Oh, his hat was sharp, and his gaze was true. But his scouts walked twice cause his brim obscured the view. You hear it once, half whispered over a cooking pot, then never again. Probably because no one wants to mysteriously disappear into... Napoleon, to his credit, never complains. Never even mentions the fit. But you notice him adjusting it more often. Less like a flourish, more like a survival tactic. Every few hours he slips behind a tent or duckwalks behind a barrel and gives his head a vigorous rub. Then he puts the hat back on. And returns to commanding Europe. You have to admire that kind of commitment. Or fear it. Or both. And so, the Alps are crossed. The campaign pushes forward. And somewhere in the woven tension between thread and scalp, the legend of the slightly too tight hat begins to settle into history, not loud, not scandalous, but always present. Like a gentle squeeze that shapes the mind of an empire. You wake early, just before the camp stirs, to the sound of boot polishers murmuring and a mule expressing deep, philosophical regret about breakfast. The air smells like burned bread and ambition. You stretch, shuffle toward the officer tents, and find yourself in the middle of an unlikely storm. A whisper chain about Napoleon's hat. Not the strategy for the day. Not morale. Not the frostbite spreading up some poor soldier's toes. Just the hat. One lieutenant, carefully lacing his boots, mutters, "He's wearing it tighter again today." Another responds, "I swear the crease is deeper." His hat's got more contour than the Alps. You sip weak coffee from a tin cup and listen as the soldiers discuss imperial millinery like seasoned haberdashers. This is how it always begins. Little murmurs, shared glances, the occasional sketch smuggled in a satchel. One of the junior dragoons pulls out a folded paper and, eyes darting, reveals what can only be called an underground satirical cartoon. It depicts Napoleon's silhouette, hat exaggerated to comic size, perched like a walnut cracker upon his skull. The caption? Vive la compression. You try not to laugh. You fail. Then look over your shoulder, just in case. Because here's the thing, the men adore Napoleon. They'd follow him into volcanic pits and out again, as long as there was soup waiting. But affection doesn't cancel out observation. And the hat is, undeniably, weird. It's not always clear when the shift happened, when the icon became inconvenience. But now, it's part of the air, every bit as noticeable as the way he crosses his arms, or how he furrows his brow just slightly deeper than nature intended. Historians still argue whether the hat sparked gossip because of its appearance, its tightness, or simply because, at some point, Napoleon wore it just long enough for everyone to start seeing the dent. And oh yes, the dent. It's subtle. Nothing grotesque. But noticeable if the light hits him just so. A kind of ridge above the temple, where the pressure sits. Where the same tight seam presses, day after day, hour by hour. You notice him touch that spot often now. Not dramatically, just an idle rub, as if trying to soothe the geography of his own skull. He refuses to acknowledge it, of course. He's Napoleon. He once crossed the continent with no maps and 3 sandwiches. He doesn't bow to hats. Hats bow to him. Except this one doesn't. This one clings. By the time the army descends from the mountains and into northern Italy, the whispers have grown creative. Some soldiers now call the hat La Petite Guillotine, a dark joke referencing both its vice-like grip and its symbolic proximity to the neck. Others nickname it the Corsican clamp. One group of artillerymen refers to it exclusively as Monsieur Squeeze. One night, you overhear an entire wine-fueled debate about whether the hat is deliberately sabotaging the war effort. A few think it's an Austrian trick, a fashionable Trojan horse, a sabotage stitched in silk. It was delivered in Paris, someone argues. Exactly, another replies, and we all. But in a war where men die over misunderstanding a hill's slope, conspiracy theories grow in the cracks left by boredom and tight stitching. Meanwhile, the officers start compensating for their leaders' headwear-induced mood swings. When Napoleon gives curt orders, they nod extra vigorously. When he snaps mid-map discussion, someone always rushes to blame poor weather, never cranial distress. And when he storms from a planning tent one morning, having knocked over a salt shaker and declared the rations traitorous, no one mentions the new, deeper crease etched into his brow. Not aloud. One aide-de-camp does, however, scribble in a personal diary. The hat grows ever snugger. So too does his tolerance. That same evening, an artist arrives at camp to paint a fresh portrait of the emperor. The man is nervous, slightly deaf, and working by lamplight. When he finishes the initial sketch, Napoleon peers at it and frowns. Why is the hat so large? To allow for realism, my lord. It looks like I'm drowning in it. Would monsieur prefer less realism? Silence. The sketch is quietly destroyed. A new one begins, this time with the hat drawn at an almost whimsical tilt, floating like a feather instead of clamping like a vice. And yet, as the artist shades in the shadow beneath the brim, you see Napoleon reflexively rub his temple again. Even he cannot unfeel it. Let's pause for a curious fringe detail. Some scholars believe Napoleon's choice to consistently wear the same hat, not just in style but in size, was part of a long-play branding effort. Like modern politicians wearing signature pins or tech CEOs clinging to black turtlenecks. But others argue, with visible concern, that Napoleon simply feared change. That once he committed to one hat, however uncomfortable, he believed switching would signal weakness. Historians still debate this. They always will. Back in the present moment, a rider gallops into camp with news of a small skirmish along the river. Napoleon mounts at once, hat secured. The march is swift, calculated, relentless. And during the advance, his horse stumbles, not dramatically, not fatally, but enough to jostle the hat. It slips forward over his eyes. He halts, mid-command, rears back, and yanks it off his head in one movement. Everyone stops breathing. Then, slowly, silently, he runs a hand along the inside brim. You see him pinch the inner band, feel the pressure lines. He sighs. And then? He puts it back on. Slightly askew. And rides. Because of course he does. You don't question gods, generals, or fashion accidents when they have momentum. But as the army moves again, someone behind you whispers. It's like the hat's winning. And no one disagrees. It's a rainy morning in Italy, and Napoleon is riding by candlelight in his campaign tent. Rain taps gently against the canvas above, like fingers drumming from an impatient sky. The ink on the page glistens briefly before soaking into parchment, sentence by sentence, line by line. And what you see, what you cannot unsee, is that he pauses every few lines to adjust his hat. Not dramatically. No eye rolls, no huffs. Just that quiet, resigned shift. Index fingers pressing upward from the temples. A slight lift and scoot. A tensing of the jaw. This letter, though, is different. It isn't to a marshal or a minister or a general. It's to Joséphine. His Joséphine. You aren't meant to see it. But since this is a sleepy bedtime story, we can peer gently over his shoulder. Carefully. Respectfully. Don't sneak. Now that's subtle, but you spot it, don't you? That passing reference. Across my own skull. He won't say it plainly, but he's acknowledging the hat. Finally. It's a deeply human paragraph dressed in metaphor, like an emperor trying to flirt with poetry while his scalp throbs under reinforced wool. The soldiers grumble less than usual. I suspect because they are too damp to mutiny. Ney mistook a goat for a scout. I told him to promote it anyway. Morale is crucial. I am well if weary. The burden of decision weighs heavy. As does this wretched headgear. There it is. He calls it wretched. That's a big moment. Historians still argue whether this is the first written admission of hat discomfort from Napoleon himself. Some claim it's exaggerated, later embellished by copyists or overzealous translators. Others insist it proves the emperor's willingness to self-reflect, even if only via romantic metaphor and battlefield sarcasm. Joséphine, meanwhile, keeps every letter. She reads them alone at Malmaison, reclining in her reading room surrounded by overwatered plants and underloved dogs. When she reads that line, the one about wretched headgear, she raises an eyebrow, calls for her modiste, and begins drafting a plan. Joséphine was never one to sit by while her husband suffered silently. Especially not when there was fabric involved. She begins corresponding, discreetly, with Parisian milliners, some reputable, some borderline mythical. One works entirely in velvet. Another claims to have invented a folding hat that can be stored in a glove. A third is said to be able to weave felt so soft it causes spontaneous apologies. Back in Italy, Napoleon continues the campaign. The hat continues its private siege. And the letters keep coming. My sweet Joséphine. Your last perfume still lingers in my coat, offering more comfort than this blasted crown of wool and resentment. Beloved, they say weather influences the mind. I say it is the hat. My thoughts pool in my temples like soup in a bowl too tightly covered. You almost feel bad for him. Almost. Because yes, he's at the helm of a continent-wide reshuffle. Yes, he's leading a nation on the brink of modernity. But also, he is a man in a mildly uncomfortable hat, refusing to take it off because pride is more binding than thread. One of his aides suggests, during a particularly grumpy breakfast, that perhaps a looser-fitting cap might help strategy flow more freely. That aide is reassigned to cartography duty in Sardinia. But not before scribbling this in his diary. The emperor's genius is unquestionable, as is his stubbornness. The hat, I fear, is winning the battle for his forehead. And so, the hat remains. It's present at every meeting. It looms in every council. Even during moments of apparent levity, say, when someone mistakenly serves him hot wine instead of coffee, he lifts it off only momentarily before pressing it back down with both hands. As if it's part of his spine now. Which, metaphorically, it might be. Until one day, months later, a package arrives. Addressed simply, to His Majesty, from one who knows. Inside? A velvet box. Inside the box? A hat. Not a bicorn. Not even a tricorn. Something softer. More rounded. Elegant but humble. It's deep navy, almost black. And lined with silk so smooth it practically apologizes to your fingertips. There's no note. But you know who it's from. He picks it up. Weighs it in his hand. He puts it on. And sighs. Relief. Real relief. The kind that's audible. The kind that makes the tent walls breathe with you. But then, after no more than 50, and nostalgia, even when uncomfortable, fits better than uncertainty. He says nothing to his aides. But the new hat stays in the tent. In the box. like a backup dream. He writes to Joséphine that night. Received your gift. It is exquisite. But I fear it does not look like command. And a general must wear what matches destiny. He doesn't say the other part. That it didn't hurt. That it felt kind. That it felt like someone remembered his humanity, not just his iconography. You imagine Joséphine reading the letter, nodding, and then ordering 5 more hats in increasing levels of softness. She'll never stop trying. And he'll never stop wearing the one that hurts. You're ankle-deep in muck outside a camp on the Ligurian coast when the conversation turns, as it always somehow does, to the hat. It's never just about war, or supplies, or the weather, which today feels like someone poured soup into the sky and forgot to stir. No, the soldiers always circle back to the one detail everyone can see but no one dares mention, the hat that grips tighter than a mother-in-law's handshake. You overhear a corporal, polishing the same rifle for the 3rd time, mutter, "He tilted it so far today, I think it blinked first." The soldiers laugh in that half-suppressed, trench humor sort of way. They respect him. They adore him. But also, they are human, and humans need to joke, especially when the weather is miserable and your commander's iconic silhouette looks like it's being slowly absorbed into his scalp. Meanwhile, Napoleon is seated in the corner of his field tent, hunched over a crude map, surrounded by weary marshals who have learned, by now, not to speak too quickly or suggest that perhaps the headaches are influencing strategy. They never say the word tight. Not anymore. But here's the moment it gets serious. Because during a particularly tense planning session, just as they're finalizing troop placements outside Genoa, Napoleon suddenly stops mid-sentence. He presses 2 fingers to his temple. And winces. It's not theatrical. He doesn't groan or stagger. But he closes his eyes slowly and whispers, "It's like fire behind my brow." You don't move. No one does. Then he straightens up, smooths the brim, and continues giving orders. But you heard it. Everyone did. That one phrase, "fire behind my brow." Historians still argue whether this was the moment the headaches began in earnest, or whether they had always been there, cleverly disguised behind brilliance and thick wool. Some physicians later wrote that the compression from the hat may have aggravated underlying neural conditions. Others suggest he wore it too low, putting pressure on critical cranial points. And some simply shrug and say, that man just never rested. But something changes after that moment. The hat becomes a presence. It's no longer just a tight fit. It's a force. You notice him holding it longer before placing it on his head each morning, as if steeling himself. You catch glimpses of him rubbing the inner lining with a linen cloth, almost like he's trying to soften it by sheer willpower. And perhaps most tellingly, the hat begins to skew. Where once it perched confidently with imperial symmetry, it now drifts. Slightly left. Sometimes forward. On windy days, practically horizontal. Like it's trying to leap off his head in protest. You're not the only one who notices. Marechal Berthier starts sketching battle positions with a visible lean to the left. General Suchet places his camp chairs at odd angles, unconsciously mimicking the hat's off-kilter vibe. The entire inner circle begins to absorb the imbalance, like wine soaking into, and the hat, just slightly, slips forward and touches the rim of his wine. There is an audible clink. He pauses, looks up, says nothing. But every man in that room lowers his cup just a little faster. That evening, by candlelight, you witness a rare moment of vulnerability. Napoleon stands alone, staring at his reflection in a polished steel tray, his makeshift mirror. He's taken off the hat. His hair is slightly matted from wear, the red mark faint but undeniable, curved like the top of a violin. He touches it with the gentleness of someone tracing a scar. Then, from a leather pouch, he pulls out a folded kerchief. It's not military issue. Not even standard court linen. It's floral. A tiny corner reads, "Pour mon amour eternel, J. Joséphine." He lays the cloth over his crown. Then places the hat gently over it. A buffer. A compromise. And then? A long breath. Relief. Tiny, stubborn, romantic relief. You don't tell anyone. Because something about that moment, about the world's most powerful man gently tucking a floral handkerchief beneath his war crown, feels like a secret worth protecting. Of course, by the next morning it's gone. The kerchief is back in the pouch. And the hat is tight again. Because compromises are for evenings, and empires are built in the morning. Still, that image stays with you. It hums in the background as the army marches forward. Through hills, over rivers, into towns that cheer and toss flowers and never notice the faint line pressed into their emperor's skin. But inside the war rooms, it becomes an unspoken reality. The strategy meetings grow shorter. The pauses between commands longer. Sometimes he taps a pencil against his forehead. Not out of thought, but out of irritation. As if each beat might knock something loose. One aide begins sneaking chamomile into his wine. Another experiments with rubbing wax into the lining, hoping to soften the seam. Nothing helps. You wonder what would happen if he simply took it off. If he walked into battle bareheaded. Would the men still cheer? Would the enemy still fear him? Or has the hat become so synonymous with power that removing it would feel like removing the crown itself? Historians still debate this. Was Napoleon the man, or the silhouette? Did the tightness fuel his fury? Did the discomfort sharpen his tactics, keeping him forever alert, like a lion trying to shake off an invisible fly? You'll never know. But as you ride beside him into yet another valley, dust rising like steam from the earth, and you watch him squint into the sun with that slight tilt, more hat than man, you start to think. Maybe this isn't just a story about a too-tight hat. Maybe it's about the things we refuse to change because we think they define us. Even when they hurt. Even when they leave marks. You're standing outside a tent, squinting against the noonday sun, when you hear the words no soldier ever expects during a military debrief. I think the hat might have cost us the ridge. It's not said loudly. Not screamed, not even muttered in anger. Just a quiet sentence, dropped like a pebble into a very deep, very tense pond. The speaker is Captain Lemoyne, a mid-tier artillery officer with a mustache as reliable as his cannon crew. And he isn't being dramatic. He's being observational. Because 2 days earlier, while the French forces were negotiating a snaking valley in the Apennines, Napoleon made a call. A surprising one. He ordered a shift to the east flank, based on what he said was a better vantage. Only, there wasn't. And by the time they realized the terrain was misleading, the Austrians had already fortified the real high ground. A mistake. Rare. Subtle. But a mistake. And Lemoyne, who'd been watching from a low ridge through a spyglass, swears he saw Napoleon adjust his hat 4 times during that assessment. Once with both hands. Once with a wince. The ridge decision was made right after. Now look, historians still argue whether this particular military misstep was due to faulty maps, a stubborn mule on the scouting team, or simply poor visibility. But there's a fringe theory, quietly passed among certain circles, that the hat's tight grip may have literally impaired his depth perception. That it squeezed just hard enough on his frontal lobe to throw off his spatial judgment. And that would mean, yes, brace yourself, a hat changed the course of a campaign. Ridiculous? Absolutely. Plausible? Also yes. Especially when you remember that this is the same hat with a confirmed pattern of generating tension headaches, jaw stiffness, and something Lanz once whispered as the Emperor's angry tilt. In the days that follow the ridge debacle, something changes in camp. The whispers don't stop, but they shift tone. They're not funny anymore. Not just jokes. They carry weight now, like little cannonballs of doubt. And yet, Napoleon carries on. Of course he does. He's still giving speeches that make grown men cry and charging across fields like the laws of physics don't apply to him. But you, and the officers who've been around long enough, start to recognize the signs. His hand hovers near his forehead more often. His temper shortens in odd ways, snapping at a misplaced spoon, or declaring a map insulting to geometry. During a public review of the troops, his hat slips again, just slightly, and in the second it takes for him to straighten it, he steps left instead of right. Nothing major. except that he nearly trips on a drum. The drummer, poor soul, looks like he's aged 10 years in 3 seconds. Napoleon doesn't scold him. He just mutters, "This ground is uneven." The drummer later tells his bunkmate, "The ground was flat. I swear on my horse." Still, nothing officially changes. You think maybe, just maybe, it's time for someone to say something. Someone trusted. Someone diplomatic. Enter Marshal Ney. Yes, Ney, the fiery, lion-hearted, notoriously bravest of the brave. If anyone has the courage to gently broach the topic of hat-induced chaos, it's Ney. So you watch, one morning, as Ney enters the imperial tent, stiff-backed and calm. He salutes. Stands silent. Waits for a nod. Then, cautiously, he begins. "Sire, if I may, the officers have noticed fatigue. Perhaps some adjustment could aid your comfort." Napoleon looks up. Adjustment? Perhaps a lighter hat during review? For visibility. There is silence. Napoleon stands slowly. Walks toward Ney. Stops half a step too close. "Are you suggesting the empire hinges on headwear, Marshal?" And there it is. The weight in the room. Like a second hat, pressing down on everyone. Ney swallows. "Only that comfort breeds clarity, sire." A pause. Then softly. "Return to your post." No yelling. No demotion. No guillotine-level fallout. But Ney knows. He nods. Salutes. Leaves. The next morning, he's reassigned to Belgium. Historians still argue whether Ney's hat talk played a role in the transfer. Some believe it was coincidental, a strategic necessity. Others say the hat wasn't the issue at all. It was that Ney dared to question the silhouette. The symbol. Because, let's be honest, at this point, the hat isn't just a hat anymore. It's Napoleon's armor. His portable throne. His myth, folded neatly over his temples. And when your myth is stitched too tight, but then you see him again one evening, shoulders relaxed, no formalities. He's just walking, alone, under the stars, hatless. His hair tousled. His forehead free. And there's a softness to him, not weak, but light. He looks up at the sky. Mouths something to himself. Smiles. Then, reluctantly, he reaches down and picks up the hat from a nearby crate. And the moment shifts. The lines return to his brow. The tilt resumes. The emperor is back. Because in the end, maybe it's not just the tightness. Maybe it's what the hat requires of him. Straight lines. Square shoulders. Absolute certainty. Even when all he wants, just for one evening, is to breathe. You wake to bird song and the smell of scorched oats, and for a fleeting moment, you imagine the world is soft again. That maybe, just maybe, Napoleon slept without the hat. But then you step out of your tent and there he is, on horseback already, hat firmly planted, angled just enough to look heroic, just enough to look tight. This morning, though, something's different. There's a bandage wrapped around his left hand. A minor riding injury, they say. Nothing serious. Just a buckle strap that caught his palm. But it's enough that when he reaches up to adjust the hat, he winces. He tries again. Same wince. So, for the first time in recent memory, Napoleon doesn't adjust it. He lets it sit exactly where it landed this morning, slightly off-center, pressing ever so awkwardly on the top of his ear. You see it twitch. Once. Twice. You brace for impact. But none comes. Instead, he rides in silence, the hat bouncing faintly with every step of his mount, like a silent metronome keeping time to discomfort. Now, this wouldn't be noteworthy, if not for what happens later that day. A delegation arrives from Milan. Stiff men in stiffer cravats, here to talk treaties and grain tariffs, and who knows what else. Usually, Napoleon shines during these things. He becomes an actor, a conductor, a negotiator capable of charming socks off a tax inspector. But not today. Today, during the very first speech, he fidgets. He fidgets. Hands clasp and unclasp. A finger taps. His neck tilts. He rubs his shoulder against the corner of the chair in a doomed attempt to reposition the hat by proxy. And as the Milanese envoy drones on about harbor duties and mutual obligation, Napoleon does something extraordinary. He removes the hat. Gently. With both hands. Cradles it like a delicate relic. The room goes quiet. Even the candlelight seems to lean in. Napoleon sets the hat down beside him. And for the next 2 hours he listens, debates, proposes, and eventually signs a preliminary accord, all without the hat. And he is different. Not softer, exactly, but more present. Less pressed. His words flow. His gaze doesn't squint as much. He even chuckles once, something about port taxation sounding like a disease. When the meeting ends, and the envoys bow their way out of the tent, everyone watches to see what he'll do. He looks at the hat. Doesn't pick it up. Instead, he walks away. Bareheaded. It's a moment. A little revolution. The top of his head, after all this time, seeing sunlight like a prisoner blinking at the open sky. But don't get too excited. The next morning, the hat is back on. Centered. Firm. Business as usual. Except now, something's changed in the way people look at it. Because the myth has cracked. They've seen him without it. Seen that the sky didn't fall, the maps didn't curl, and everyone stops moving. You look over, expecting thunder. Instead, Napoleon smiles. A small one. Tight. Controlled. But real. Measure the sky, he says. That's where we're going. And just like that, the myth heals. Recast in iron. A wink in place of a wound. Historians still argue whether that moment, joke, smile, quote, was staged. Was it a pre-planned line? A calculated maneuver to remind everyone who's in charge? Or was it spontaneous? Proof that the hat, like the man beneath it, had learned to laugh? Either way, the story spreads. That the emperor had a moment of headspace, and didn't explode. It becomes a kind of whispered magic in the camps. Young soldiers start trying on each other's shackles backwards. Someone creates a small paper cutout of Napoleon's head, with a rotating hat you can tilt for battle mode or diplomacy mode. You find yourself wondering what it's like to be so wrapped up in an image that even a moment's break from it sends ripples through an empire. Because the truth is, most people never wear anything that symbolizes them. Most people aren't defined by fabric. But Napoleon? His silhouette is history's shorthand. A profile drawn in black felt and stubbornness. And so, even if that hat gives him migraines that could flatten a lesser man, he wears it. Still, behind closed doors, the signs continue. He shortens briefings. He dimly lights his tent. He stops attending early morning drills, delegates them to Berthier or Murat. And sometimes, very rarely, you catch him resting in the late afternoon, head tilted back, hat in hand, the skin around his temples marked with twin crimson arcs. He never complains. But you see it. You all do. Joséphine writes again. Your last letter was too short. Like a sigh. I miss your longer sentences. You used to write in paragraphs that march like troops. He doesn't reply right away. But 2 days later he sends a page with one line. Some thoughts require space. My forehead currently does not allow it. She writes back within the week. Then buy a new forehead. Or at least stretch the current one. I will not accept small thoughts from a large man. You don't know what he thinks of that. But you do find him later, seated alone, carefully unlacing the inner band of the hat. Just one seam. Just enough to let a breath escape. And for the first time, he adds something to the inside. A slip of paper. Tucked into the lining. You never see what it says. But you swear, after that day, the hat sits a little easier. Not loose. Never that. But forgiving. As if the hat, too, has learned the value of letting go, just a little. You trudge through a wooded trail outside Marengo, boots squelching in the soft dirt, and you can feel it in the air, the shift. Not in the wind or the orders barked from mounted officers, but in the men themselves. The hat stories have changed. They're quieter now. Less mocking, more curious. Almost reverent. There's a new kind of lore blooming among the campfires. Little whispered what-ifs and bedtime musings about the Emperor's mysterious choice to keep wearing a hat that clearly doesn't love him back. One of the cooks calls it his crown of compression. A stable hand insists he saw Napoleon take it off and speak to it under his breath. A sapper claims he touched it once, just brushed against the brim as it rested on a crate, and dreamed of cannon fire and algebra all night long. You know it's nonsense. And yet, don't you kind of believe it? Because somehow, the hat has gained its own gravity. Not just a fashion statement, not merely too snug, but a symbol. A force field. A relic stitched in sweat and stubbornness. And today, it's riding low. Very low. You catch a glimpse of Napoleon as he rides past, eyes narrow, and this battle, it's going to be one for the history books. You can feel it in your teeth. Marengo. Historians will debate whether this moment cemented Napoleon's place in legend, or whether it was just a desperately lucky afternoon. But on this day, the Emperor rides into chaos, flanked by men who would die for him, wearing a hat that still refuses to sit straight. The battle is messy, hot, noisy, confusing. At one point, a courier gallops toward the command post with a frantic message. His horse slips in the mud, skids sideways, and crashes into a supply cart. The man survives, but the parchment is soaked beyond legibility. Napoleon frowns, looks toward the rising dust to the east. Everyone's waiting for a command. And then, the hat falls off. A gust of wind, or maybe a misstep from his horse, sends it sailing backward like a moth-black kite. It lands in the grass behind him, upside down, with a little puff of dust. The world stops. Even the birds forget how to sing. He dismounts, walks to it, picks it up, brushes off the dirt, and places it back on his head, slowly, deliberately, backward. Yes, backward. For a full 15 seconds, Napoleon wears the hat with the point facing the rear and the wide brim flaring out like the prow of a ship. And in that brief moment, no one breathes. He blinks, shrugs, rotates it forward again, and gives the command that turns the battle. It's that simple. Like resetting a compass. Historians still argue about the hat reversal. Some say it never happened. Others swear it was a psychological tactic, to momentarily shock his own officers into focus. A few fringe thinkers even suggest the hat itself told him what to do, as if the backward fit allowed clarity. And yes, that's ridiculous. But you were there. You saw his shoulders relax just slightly when it came off. Saw how he stood straighter, breathed deeper, thought quicker. And maybe, just maybe, that moment of air on his scalp was all he needed. After the victory, the soldiers erupt into celebration. They cheer his name. They toss caps into the sky. And then, one daring grenadier starts chanting, "Turn the hat! Turn the hat!" The others pick it up. Soon the chant ripples through the ranks like a hymn. Napoleon hears it, and he smiles. He does not turn the hat again, but he lets them sing. Later that night, back at camp, he sits with a glass of brandy and a map of Italy spread before him. His boots are muddy, his knuckles scraped. The corner of his left eye twitches faintly with exhaustion. The hat rests beside him, folded along its familiar bend, steam rising faintly from its damp rim. You watch as he lifts it. Not to wear it, just to study it. He turns it over, looks inside, traces the seam with one finger. And then, without warning, he speaks. Do you think it shapes the mind? The hat? You freeze. Was he talking to you? No. He's looking past you. Or maybe inward. Every time I wear it, I think differently. Narrower. Sharper. Like the world has edges. When I take it off, everything feels rounder. Wider. Softer. He sips the brandy. But round thoughts don't win wars. He says it quietly, not as a boast, but like someone reciting a sad truth. Then he places the hat back down and adds, "Still, it pinches." And there it is. The most honest thing he's said in weeks. And so do you. Because maybe, just maybe, that cloth did more than soften fabric. Maybe it softened fate. Morning comes slow and golden, the kind that filters through canvas like melted butter, and coaxes you awake instead of dragging you from sleep. You blink, stretch, and for a brief moment, you wonder if this might finally be the day Napoleon doesn't wear the hat. Spoiler, he does. But this time, it looks cooperative. The brim lies flatter. The tilt feels deliberate. There's a strange air of peace around it, as if man and millinery have reached a silent treaty in the night. You spot the corner of the new silk liner peeking from the inside edge. Barely visible. Just a whisper of softness between centuries of pressure. The effect on Napoleon is subtle, but real. He eats more slowly. Walks with less urgency. Actually listens when an aide suggests postponing a morning review due to fog. He even nods, which is so uncharacteristic that two drummers drop their spoons. Word spreads fast. The general's in a good mood. And you can't help but suspect that it has everything to do with the hat finally learning a little mercy. Of course, not everyone is thrilled. There are some in camp who've built their entire worldview on Napoleon's tight hat. The idea that his brilliance comes from pressure, mental, physical, political. Take that away, and what's left? One colonel even mutters, if the hat softens, does the man soften too? You want to say, maybe that's the point. But before philosophical debates can spoil the porridge, something happens. Napoleon calls for a tailor. Yes, a tailor. Not a general. Not a scout. A tailor. And when the wiry little man arrives, stammering apologies and trailing measuring tape, Napoleon doesn't bark. Doesn't command. He simply removes the hat, holds it up, and says, "It needs to fit me." Not the legend. The tailor blinks. "Sire? Legends don't get headaches." "I do." And just like that, it's real. The adjustment has begun. You stand to the side, watching the tailor examine the hat like it's some ancient relic. He touches the seam. Measures the inner band. Clicks his tongue thoughtfully and mutters something about overstretched tension lines. He suggests letting out the stitching by a hair's breadth. Napoleon agrees. It takes less than 20 minutes. When it's done, the hat doesn't look any different. But the change is undeniable. Napoleon sets it on his head and, miracle of miracles, smiles. It's the smile of a man who's just realized he doesn't have to suffer to be taken seriously. He walks outside, blinking into the light. And the world doesn't end. In fact, things seem smoother. The day unfolds gently. Troop reports come in with fewer mistakes. Officers actually laugh during the midday break. Someone plays a flute. The air shifts. That evening, around the campfires, the jokes return, but they've changed tone. Less teasing. More affectionate. The hat is now a character in its own right. A redeemed villain. A reformed tyrant. One soldier sings a little ditty. "O hat of war and head of lead. No longer do you squeeze with dread. You learn to sit, to breathe, to play. A crown that lets its king go gray. It's not winning any medals, but it earns chuckles. And more importantly, no one's scared of the hat anymore." Later that week, Napoleon receives a gift from an old friend in Paris. A new bicorn, hand-stitched, made from impossibly fine felt and lined with lavender-scented padding. The note reads, "For when the old one forgets to be kind." Napoleon reads it once. Smiles. Then hands it to an aide and says, "Give this to Marshal Soult. His hat is a disgrace." Because that's the thing. He's not giving up the old, but he's changed it. Molded it. Made it work with him instead of against him. Historians still argue whether this marks the moment when Napoleon began truly evolving as a leader. Was it a sign of growth? A rare act of self-care in a world that rarely permits it? Or was it merely the action of a tired man doing something practical for once? You don't care. You just know the headaches ease. And the empire marches forward. But quietly, behind the scenes, the hat starts to take on new meaning. It becomes a symbol not of stubbornness, but of resilience. Adaptability. The men begin to call it the loyal shadow. They draw sketches of it on flags, carve its outline into rifle stocks. A black arch with two wings, part bat, part boat, part unspoken promise. Napoleon leans into the myth, but now with a wink. He starts including the silhouette in official correspondence. Even stamps it on coinage. But every time he places it on his head, he pauses first. Just for a second. Just to check that it's sitting right. One evening, you find him alone in his tent, polishing the brim with a cloth. Not because it needs it. Just out of habit. He sees you watching. Strange, he says, how we let things define us. Until one day, we decide we get a say. He sets the hat down. Letting go isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's command. And you realize, he's not talking about the hat anymore. Not entirely. The war continues. Battles are won. Some are lost. Time, as ever, refuses to wait. But in the rare quiet moments, when the skies go pink and the camp smells faintly of stew and gunpowder, you spot him seated by the fire. Hat beside him. Head bare. And smiling. Because the tightest battles aren't always fought with cannons. Sometimes they're fought an inch above your eyebrows. You're riding along a tree-lined path outside Ulm when you hear it again. That unmistakable creak of wool and sweat. The near-mythical sound of Napoleon adjusting his hat. Only this time, it's different. There's no wince. No sharp intake of breath. Just a firm, quiet motion. A tilt. A settle. Like someone setting down a favorite book, not too hard, not too soft. You notice it instantly, and so does everyone else nearby, even if they don't say it aloud. It's the new normal now. The hat still sits atop his head, as iconic as ever, but something has shifted. It's no longer a weight. It's a companion. The campaign through Bavaria is brisk, almost alarmingly smooth. Towns surrender before the gates are even dented. Austrian scouts vanish like mist. It's like the entire army is moving under a spell of coordination. Napoleon seems clearer. Sharper, yes, but also more relaxed. He delegates more often. Smiles in briefings. One morning, he even asks if someone brought jam. Jam. Can you imagine? Marshal Berthier jokes it's because the hat no longer siphons joy from his skull. He earns a rare laugh, which is, frankly, more terrifying than a scolding. You ride alongside Napoleon that afternoon, just as the sun starts to lean west. His eyes are scanning the horizon. The hat, faithful shadow, rests at a proud angle. You ask gently if he slept well. He glances at you and says, "For once, my dreams were wider than my brow." And that's something. That's not nothing. Later that day, a new recruit stumbles as he salutes, clearly nervous. His boots are mismatched, his hands shaking like reeds in wind. Napoleon watches him, silent. Then he steps forward, takes off the hat, and rests it, for just a moment, on the recruit's head. The boy freezes. His fellow soldiers, and the boy, he stands straighter, taller. Like the sweat on his back just turned to steel. Historians still debate whether this event actually occurred. Some call it myth-making, a romantic flourish scribbled by camp poets. Others claim the boy, later identified as Private Lucien Giroux, kept a lock of wool from that hat under his pillow for the rest of his life. You believe it. Mostly because you saw it. But it's more than just a nice story. It's a symbol. That moment spreads through the ranks like wildfire, faster than news of rations, faster than marching orders. The hat isn't just a crown now. It's an omen of trust. A sign that Napoleon isn't just building an empire. He's building a culture. You see this reflected even in the local towns. Merchants begin crafting replicas, miniature bicorns made of bread, of lace, of leather scraps. Children run through the alleys with napkin-folded hats, pretending to issue decrees. Somehow, his too-tight hat has become adorable. That should be impossible. But war has a way of bending symbols, of finding softness in severity. One night, as frost creeps in and the tents shiver with wind, Napoleon calls for his valet. He hands over the hat and says, "Let's try a variation." The valet blinks. "Sire?" "A lighter weave." but same silhouette. And just like that, it begins, a redesign. Quietly. Carefully. You watch them test fabric samples in the dim tent light. One's too flimsy. Another too rigid. One is waterproof but rustles when touched, immediately dismissed. I refuse to sound like paper in the rain. After several tries, they settle on a wool-silk blend. Still dark. Still elegant. But lighter. Gentler. You watch as the valet stitches in a strip of padding shaped like a crescent moon. And when Napoleon puts it on, oh, that moment. He doesn't just wear it. He inhabits it. You swear the tent itself sighs in relief. And yet, despite the success, he keeps the old one. Packs it carefully. Wraps it in a silk scarf like a relic bound for a shrine. Just in case, he murmurs. It's a relic, yes, but also a reminder. Of pressure. Of growth. Of a version of himself that bled for victory. And like any man with a myth to manage, he doesn't destroy his past. He archives it. The next day, the new hat debuts publicly. And no one notices. Which is perfect. Because that's the goal. Evolution without disruption. Comfort without concession. Even during the battle at Austerlitz, under the low gray skies and crack of frost-kissed musketry, the new hat sits steady, confident, graceful. A general nearby swears it made Napoleon look 10 years younger. A surgeon argues it made him 5 pounds taller. A cook says it just made him less mean. And amid the chaos, the smoke, the shouts, Napoleon lifts his arm, adjusts the brim just slightly, and smiles, as he delivers one of the most perfectly timed counterattacks in recorded history. Historians still argue whether the hat helped him win that day. Most say no. But one French scholar writes, "When you change what rests upon the head, you change the thoughts inside it." Napoleon's greatest victory was not Austerlitz. It was remembering he had a choice. That quote, of course, is now engraved under a painting of the hat in the Musée de l'Armée. But back in the field, you're just glad he doesn't grimace when he puts it on. You're glad the hat doesn't bite anymore. Because war bites enough. And sometimes, the smallest mercy, because what else would you expect on the morning Napoleon decides to lead a parade through a soaked Bavarian village? The kind of rain that isn't dramatic or cinematic, just wet. Persistently, impersonally wet. The kind that seeps into your socks and optimism at the same time. But there he is, astride his gray horse, calm and upright, with the hat sitting pristine atop his head, angled just so, neither daring the heavens nor fearing them. And the hat? It's holding. Somehow, miraculously, not drooping. Not wilting. As if the new wool-silk blend has absorbed a whisper of defiance from its wearer. You and the rest of the retinue trail behind as villagers press against fences and lean from windows, tossing petals and bread and the occasional confused potato. A small child waves a stick in salute. Someone has carved it into the vague shape of a bicorn, tied with blue ribbon at each point. You swear Napoleon sees it, and, no lie, gives the tiniest nod. That afternoon, as the army sets up temporary quarters in the abbey courtyard, you overhear the tail end of a conversation between Napoleon and a local priest. The priest is curious, soft-spoken but bold in that way clergy sometimes are when they've made peace with the idea of death. "Why always the same hat, sire?" Napoleon raises an eyebrow. "You ask as though it wears me. Doesn't it?" There's a pause. You wait for the usual imperial answer, sharp, confident, unyielding. But instead, Napoleon chuckles. Actually chuckles. Perhaps. But now, we've come to an agreement. The priest smiles. Says nothing more. Later, as dusk settles, you catch Napoleon in the refectory, seated alone at a long stone table, the hat beside his half-finished soup. His fingers trace lazy circles around its rim, like a man petting a dozing cat. And for a moment, it looks less like headgear and more like a memory. Historians still argue whether this visit to the abbey marked a turning point in Napoleon's personal philosophy. Some scholars say he became more introspective here, less obsessed with conquest, more aware of legacy. Others argue he was always this way, just hidden under layers of military theater and very, very tight headwear. But something in his manner changes after that evening. The next morning, he skips the usual military review. Instead, he walks alone through the cloisters, the hat tucked under his arm. The monks don't speak to him, but they bow as he passes. You notice he touches the brim gently with 2 fingers in return, like a quiet benediction. You wonder if he's thinking about what the priest said. You wonder if he's thinking about not being the man in the hat. Later that week, you ride past a small stone bridge on the edge of town and overhear a conversation between 2 quartermasters. You think he'll ever change it up? What, like feathers? No, like... Leave it behind. He leaves it, we all panic. Fair point. Because even now, the silhouette is everything. From a distance, that hat is still how you know him. That slanted line across the battlefield. That shadow that precedes diplomacy or destruction. In one village, a cobbler makes a tiny model of it out of horse leather and sells it as a good luck charm. In another, a baker creates pain de Napoleon, a bread shaped like the hat, with little raisin buttons and a marzipan lining. Word gets back to camp. Napoleon smiles when he hears. At least I'm not being baked into cakes, he says. You wisely don't tell him about the commemorative sponge cakes being planned back in Paris. But the hat's evolution continues. It starts small, an added stitch here, a touch of wax there. Then comes a subtle alteration to the angle of the brim. Nothing that changes the silhouette. Just refinements. Like a master swordsman adjusting his grip after 1,000 duels. And you? You start to see the metaphor in everything. The empire itself, shaped like the hat, solid, dark, oddly stylish, and occasionally too tight for comfort. But also flexible. Capable of change. One morning, Napoleon sits on a barrel beside a sleepy officer and offers this unsolicited wisdom. Most men fear change because they mistake pain for meaning. My headaches didn't make me wise. They made me short-tempered. He taps the side of his head. This skull has carried enough weight. Time to carry it smarter. And the officer, poor lad, just nods like he understands. You doubt he does. But the sentiment spreads. You notice more officers adjusting their own gear, loosening belts, switching to softer boots, even trimming absurd mustaches down to reasonable proportions. One general replaces his brass epaulets with leather, lighter, less flashy. Another admits to finally washing his cravat after 6 months, claiming the emperor's hat inspired me. Yes, it's a weird time. But a good one. Napoleon himself seems steadier. More measured. He still leads with fire, but now the flame doesn't blind. It warms. It signals. And the hat? Still the same silhouette. But no longer a burden. No longer the iron vice it once was. One quiet evening, as wind stirs the grass and distant cannons remain blessedly silent, Napoleon sets the hat on a tree stump and leans back in the grass. You sit nearby. After a while, he says, "Strange how something can hurt you and still feel like home." You nod. And neither of you say more. Because sometimes that's enough. The frost arrives without ceremony. No trumpet, no grand march, just one morning, the world wakes up glazed in silver. Tents look sugared. Horses snort steam. Soldiers curse as they unstick boots from half-frozen mud. And in the midst of this sleepy icebox, you see it, Napoleon, standing by a map table, hat on, arms crossed, breath coiling into the chilled air like miniature war ghosts. The hat sits proud, almost smug, as if it doesn't notice the cold. It should. Wool and silk, even finely stitched, can only do so much against alpine winds. But Napoleon? He doesn't flinch. Not outwardly. The truth, of course, is that frost plays no favorites, not even with emperors. You notice him adjust the brim with an extra beat of hesitation. He wears gloves now, even indoors, and the skin just beneath the edge of the hat carries the telltale flush of cold-chafed pressure. But he says nothing. Because this is Austria. And Austria means war again. You're en route to Vienna, and every mile feels like it's waiting to crack underfoot. Snow muffles the sounds of movement, but the hat, oddly, makes them louder. Its outline against the sky becomes a beacon. Villagers peek from shuttered windows. Soldiers straighten their spines as soon as they see that dark curve cresting over the next hill. By now, the hat has become the army's compass. Wherever it turns, they turn. Wherever it lowers, they prepare to charge. One grizzled fusilier says it best. If the hat's steady, we don't run. And that's no small thing in the middle of winter with Austrian sabers just a valley away. That night, around a campfire, one of the engineers, clearly delirious from either brandy or boredom, poses a question. Do you think the hat dreams? There's a pause. Laughter, sure, but only after. And not much. Because once the giggles fade, the idea kind of, you look at it the next morning, resting beside Napoleon as he writes a dispatch. And you wonder, does it remember? All those councils. All those battles. All the sweat and shouts and storm-thick air it's endured? Has it absorbed something over time? A residue of ambition? Historians still argue whether objects can become imbued with purpose. Some believe symbols remain inert until someone pours belief into them. Others claim items like Napoleon's hat carry the memory of action itself, that they become relics because they've witnessed history, not just adorned it. Whatever the case, this particular morning, the hat seems unusually solemn. Even the light hits it softer. Vienna is close now, and you can feel the tension thrum beneath the ice. Napoleon spends longer staring at his maps. His briefings go quieter, more surgical, as if he's measuring consequences by the inch, not by the mile. And during one such map session, he does something new. He takes the hat off, and places it on the map itself. Right over Vienna. His index finger taps the city name once. The heart of Europe, he mutters. And this, he gestures to the hat, is the hand that will squeeze it. Okay, slightly dramatic. But that's kind of his thing. Still, you notice something else. When he lifts the hat again, a faint circle remains pressed into the parchment. A ghost ring. Like an omen. The next day, Vienna surrenders without a shot. It's surreal. Napoleon enters the city like he's returning to a favorite room, calm, efficient, unblinking. Civilians stand still as statues. Officials bow with shaky grace. And you trail behind, boots echoing through marble halls as he steps into the Hofburg. The moment is theatrical. He knows it. Everyone knows it. But what you notice most isn't the gold trim or the velvet carpet. It's how quiet the hat is. It doesn't wobble. Doesn't loom. It simply fits. And somehow, that's more powerful than any fanfare. A Viennese artist asks permission to sketch him that evening. Not a full portrait, just the hat. Napoleon agrees. When the sketch is revealed, it's shockingly elegant. Minimalist. Just lines and shadow. But it captures something true. Not the hat as burden. Not as crown. But as signature. Napoleon looks at the sketch for a long time. Then signs it. Let others wear jewels. I wear resolve. You resist the urge to tell him that sounded like something off a decorative pillow. That night you pass a wine cellar repurposed as temporary quarters for young officers. They're playing a game, mimicking Napoleon's stride, striking poses in front of barrels with folded napkins on their heads. The one who gets the tilt right wins. They laugh. But there's awe underneath it. Because even mocked, the hat retains dignity. Like an old general pretending to nap while secretly monitoring the rookies. Outside, snow begins to fall again. Quiet. Blanketing. And you find Napoleon on the palace balcony, staring at the white rooftops. He doesn't hear you approach, not until you speak. Thinking of spring? He doesn't answer immediately. Then he lifts the hat, slowly, and places it over his chest. Thinking of what comes after. And that's the closest he's ever come to sounding tired. Not defeated. Just aware that every crown, even one made of felt and legacy, gets heavy eventually. Still, the next morning, the army marches again. Because peace is never permanent. Not for emperors. Not for hats. You watch as the silhouette rides forward, slicing through the snow glare like a story being written in ink. And behind it, thousands follow. You hear the creak of saddle leather before you see him. Napoleon, astride a fresh chest, but not all is ease and triumph. With Austria momentarily cowed, Napoleon's gaze shifts again, toward Prussia. Toward shifting alliances, suspicious diplomats, and more wars hiding in embroidered waistcoats. You ride past columns of men marching with grim determination, their boots slapping against the half-frozen road in rhythmic defiance. A drummer taps out a beat that's oddly cheerful for the weather. And amid the crunch and chant of movement, one voice pipes up. I wonder if the hat has its own passport. A ripple of laughter. The joke isn't new. But it still works. Because now, the hat's more than iconic, it's mobile diplomacy. Its arrival in any city means business, even if the business is conquest. Local officials don't panic when they hear the army is approaching. They panic when they hear he is. And when they ask, is he bringing the hat? Well, you know things are about to get serious. During a short pause in Saxony, Napoleon meets with a German naturalist who presents him with a gift, a travel-sized bicorn, made from stiffened bat wings and lacquered with pine resin. It's horrifying. And kind of adorable. Napoleon takes it with a raised eyebrow. Do I look like a man who wears bat hats? Only if the bat surrenders, the naturalist replies. There's a pause. Then, astonishingly, a grin. He keeps the tiny hat. Doesn't wear it, obviously. But sets it on a shelf inside his carriage like a particularly macabre paperweight. Historians still argue whether the bat hat story is true. Some say it was invented by post-war propagandists to make Napoleon seem more eccentric. Others claim the bat hat remains in a private collection in Dresden. Either way, its legend only adds layers to the myth. Meanwhile, the real hat, the proper, slightly adjusted, gently lined one, stays loyal. Through snow. Through sleet. Through a surprise diplomatic dinner with Saxon nobles, where the hat sits just slightly askew in the candlelight, making one countess faint and another sketch it furiously in her napkin. It has presence. Aura. Swagger. But the truth is, Napoleon's relationship with it continues to shift. You see it most clearly one morning during a river crossing. He's seated on a crate, watching engineers stabilize a makeshift bridge. A wind picks up, tugging at cloaks and flapping standards. One strong gust lifts the brim of the hat just slightly, enough to flick it up and nearly off. But Napoleon doesn't snatch it back. He lets it sit there, one corner awkwardly lifted, like a poorly fastened roof tile. A lesser man would have corrected it immediately. Napoleon? He smiles. Let it flap, he says. Even the hat wants to fly. It's the kind of thing he'd never say in public, of course. But to those nearby, it's electric. You wonder sometimes what would happen if he ever did take it off for good. If he laid it down and walked away, bareheaded, into obscurity. But the idea seems distant. Like asking the moon to take a night off. And then, something odd happens. You arrive in Berlin. Not storming it. Not conquering it. Just arriving. It's tense, sure. The city's quiet, tight-lipped, heavy with political frost. But for now, it's diplomacy that rules the day. And in this strange lull, Napoleon does something nobody expects. He goes shopping. Not extravagantly. Just a walk through a covered arcade, gloves tucked behind his back, hat sitting elegantly atop his head. You follow at a respectful distance as he browses books, examines telescope lenses, and, of all things, tries on gloves. And there, in the window of a modest haberdashery, you both see it. A hat. Not a bicorn. A soft, wide-brimmed traveling cap, slightly worn at the edges, beige with a faint green ribbon. Entirely ordinary. Entirely tempting. Napoleon pauses. Studies it. Then steps inside. You watch from the doorway as he holds it, turns it, places it gently on his head. The transformation is immediate and jarring. He looks anonymous. Not like an emperor. Not like a general. Just a man, A tired man, with hollow eyes and too many maps. He stares at himself in the mirror for a long time. Then removes the cap. Too honest, he mutters. Leaves it on the counter. And walks out. No one speaks for several minutes. Later, back at quarters, you find the bicorn resting on its usual place beside the desk. But something's changed. He hasn't dusted it. Hasn't adjusted the lining. He just lets it sit. Like he's finally acknowledging that, while the hat may be his symbol, it isn't him. Not entirely. That evening, in a rare moment of openness, he says, "You know, if the wind had been stronger today, I might have let it go." You raise an eyebrow. The hat? He nods. Everything. But he doesn't. Not yet. Because tomorrow, more treaties await. More bluffs, more maneuvers, more stiff chairs and even stiffer rooms. And he'll need the hat for those. Because while it may not define him anymore, it still introduces him. The sun comes late in winter and leaves early, like an impatient guest at a formal dinner. You wake to the kind of dim light that makes everything feel quiet even when it's not. Somewhere in the distance, horses snort, boots clomp, fires crackle, but it all feels softened, wrapped in a hush of morning frost. Napoleon sits by the window. No hat. Just tousled hair and a robe that looks borrowed from a Prussian noble with questionable taste in embroidery. His hand hovers over a stack of letters unread. Instead, he watches steam rise from a tin cup. You approach hesitantly. His eyes stay on the window. "Do you ever feel," he begins, voice low, "that some things were meant to be lost?" You don't answer right away. You don't need to. Because next to him, sitting in a clean patch of velvet cloth, is the hat. Folded neatly. Silent. The same bicorn, same slant, same storm-dark color. But today, it feels like an heirloom resting before its funeral. You sit beside him and wait. He finally breaks the silence. "I had a dream," he says. "I was walking through a hallway of mirrors. And in every reflection, I wore a different crown. A laurel. A helmet. A golden wreath. But never this." He gestures toward the hat. "And I kept searching for it. Not because I needed it, but because I was afraid of who I was without it." You nod slowly. He doesn't look at you, but he knows you're listening. "In one mirror, I was laughing. In another, I was weeping." He reaches for the cup, takes a slow sip. Outside, Berlin stirs. More wagons. More couriers. But inside this room, time folds in on itself like a letter with no destination. Later that day, a delegation from Poland arrives. Fancy uniforms. Empty flattery. Big words like destiny and glory that Napoleon usually enjoys. But this time, he's quiet. They offer him a ceremonial sash. A jeweled sword. And then, because they've clearly done their homework, a brand new hat. Bicorn, of course. Crisp. Expensive. Lined with red silk and tipped with a discreet, golden trim. It's objectively stunning. You can practically hear the sewing guilds patting themselves on the back. Napoleon takes it with a neutral expression. Holds it up. Turns it once. Twice. Then says, "Beautiful. But not mine." And hands it back. Historians still argue whether this period, post-Berlin, pre-Wagram, marks the beginning of Napoleon's existential doubt. Some believe he began questioning the persona he built. Others think he simply caught a cold and got sentimental. A few fringe voices whisper that the hat itself was cursed to draw introspection from its wearer like wine from a barrel. You know better. It wasn't a curse. It was comfort. And now, comfort feels dangerous. Because peace has a way of peeling off the armor, revealing the soft, beating doubts underneath. You hear it in how the generals talk when they think no one's listening. He's quieter lately. Do you think he's planning something? He's always planning something. And he is. But it's not just tactics. It's legacy. One afternoon, during a walk along the spree, he asks you a question. What do they say about me? When I leave a place? You hesitate. They say you're unforgettable. Unforgettable is not the same as beloved. He pauses by a bench. Do they ever talk about the hat? You nod. Always. Good. At least something stays with them. You sit beside him, coat wrapped tight. After a long pause, he speaks again. I once thought it made me look taller. You grin? It does. Yes, well. Height is just measured in inches. Authority is measured in silhouettes. He lifts the hat briefly, then rests it on his lap. This silhouette won me countries. And gave you headaches. He laughs. Everything worth having does. That night you dream of parades. Not real ones, but the kind your mind invents when it's tired. Marches made of ink and fog. Napoleon leads them all, sometimes in uniform, sometimes in robes, sometimes barefoot. But always with the hat. Always with that unmistakable outline guiding thousands through imagined streets. When you wake, he's already gone. A note on your cot reads, "Gone ahead to Dresden. Bring the hat." Simple. Trusting. You wrap it carefully. Not in military cloth, but in a scarf. Soft. Old. Maybe his mother's. You don't ask. You ride at dawn, the hat secured like a relic. And as you go, you think about mirrors. And about how many reflections one man can live in before he forgets which one smiles back. You reach Dresden under a sky that seems like it's forgotten how to be blue. Just layers of gray stacked like unbaked bread, stretching over roofs and chimneys and all the sharp, ambitious stone of Saxon architecture. Napoleon is already there, of course. He always arrives like a rumor first, then reality. And when you find him? He's on a balcony. Not addressing troops. Not plotting siege. Just sipping something hot and wearing the hat. Yes, the same one. You exhale in quiet relief. For a moment, after the Berlin silences and wistful talk, you wondered if he'd left it behind, replaced it with something lighter or nothing at all. But no. There it is. Tilted at its usual decisive angle, shadowing his eyes as if framing a thought too large for daylight. He sees you. Nods once. You brought it? You're already wearing it. I meant the other one. And sure enough, you check your satchel. Nestled in folds of cloth, the red-trimmed bicorn from Poland, the one he politely declined but asked to be sent anyway. He's collecting them now. Not to wear. Just to observe. He places this one beside two others on a low table, one from Spain, one from Italy. All similar. All trying too hard. Each designed to flatter, to impress, to overwrite history with brocade and symbolic ribbon. Napoleon leans back. They want to dress me like a myth. Aren't you one already? He doesn't smile. Myth is easy. It's truth that stains. That afternoon, Dresden hosts a reception. Not military. Diplomatic. Fancy uniforms, powdered wigs, the works. String quartets playing music that sounds like elegantly suppressed boredom. People orbit Napoleon like moths around a bonfire, hoping not to get singed. And on his head? Yes. The hat. Not the new ones. Not the gold-lined showpieces. The one that earned its place, thread by thread. The Saxon minister leans in and whispers. We expected a crown. Napoleon gestures to the hat. This is heavier. The room doesn't know how to respond. So it clinks glasses and carries on. Historians still argue whether the Dresden reception marked the moment Napoleon intentionally began curating his legacy. Some say his use of the hat was a public defiance of ceremonial expectation, a way to assert control over his own myth. Others claim he just genuinely preferred the fit. You suspect both are true. Because later, when the nobles have gone and the candles drip into little wax ghosts, Napoleon walks alone down the palace corridor. You follow at a respectful distance. He stops by a full-length mirror. Studies himself. Then, without warning, removes the hat. Stares at it. And in that moment, something shifts. He places it, not on a hook, not on a shelf, but on a velvet pillow someone left on a side table. Almost like he's offering it a rest. Or perhaps offering himself a moment to step outside of the silhouette. You don't speak. Neither does he. But when he finally turns, his eyes seem lighter. Not happy exactly, but less haunted. The next morning, word spreads that a sketch artist has been summoned. Not unusual. Napoleon commissions portraits like most people commission coffee. But this one is different. This one is just the hat. No face. No figure. Just the shadow of it against a pale background, rendered in soft charcoal. He signs the bottom, anonymous crown, and has it framed, placed in the hallway outside his quarters. You ask why. He shrugs. Let them wonder whose head it fits. Another officer mutters that it's the most arrogant thing he's ever seen. But you know better. It's not arrogance. It's protection. Because if the hat becomes the icon, then Napoleon, the man, can disappear behind it when he needs to. Duck into myth when real life grows too heavy. And isn't that what we all do? Wear masks. Lean on symbols. Let shadows stand in for substance when we're tired of being ourselves. One evening, during a rare thunderstorm, Napoleon sits with you under the awning, sharing slices of hard bread and a bottle of something that's definitely not medicinal. He's talkative, which is rare. Talks about his mother. About Corsican winds. About a childhood friend who once told him, "You'll never wear a crown, but maybe you'll earn a really important hat." He laughs. Guess he was half right. The lightning flashes. The hat rests nearby, untouched by the rain, catching a gleam with each rumble of sky. You ask him if he'll ever pass it on. He shakes his head. This one dies with me. A successor? Can choose their own headache. Fair enough. But still, the idea sticks with you. That someday, someone else might wear a version of that hat, not in size, but in spirit. Carrying the weight. Leading the dance. Squinting into futures Napoleon can't even imagine. For now, though, the hat remains his. And you? You keep watching. Keep learning its language. The way it dips when he doubts, angles when he decides, stiffens when he's bluffing. Because it speaks, in its own quiet dialect of gesture and tilt. And you've become fluent. The following weeks pass in a peculiar rhythm, half march, half ballet. Treaties form, break, reform. Letters come in bundles, laced with rumor and wax. Maps are spread like quilts over oak tables. And through it all, Napoleon moves with a strange quietness. Not hesitation, no, never that. But deliberation, as though each step weighs something larger than territory. The hat, of course, is still with him. But it begins to make fewer appearances. You notice this slowly, like the fading of birdsong in late autumn. At first, he's simply bareheaded during council meetings. Then, it's reviews of troops done with a military cap instead. And one morning, as he rides out to inspect artillery placement, you blink twice at the unfamiliar silhouette. A plainer hat. Still formal. Still dark. But not the hat. Not the old friend. Not the stormcatcher. It's resting in his study when you find it later that night, perched on a stack of old orders. And for the first time, it looks lonely. You brush your fingers across its brim. The wool has softened from years of use. The inner lining bears the curve of his brow, pressed and like a fossil. There's a faint scent, leather, ink, and something indefinably Napoleon, the musk of intent. And next to it, folded neatly, is a note. Not signed. Just one line. Even gods must rest their crowns. You think of giving it back. Marching into his quarters and declaring that the hat isn't done yet, that the war isn't over, that symbols don't get to retire mid-campaign. But you don't. Because deep down, you understand. He's not retiring the hat. He's protecting it. Letting it fade before wear turns to parody. Before the legend creaks under its own weight. Historians still argue whether this period marks the beginning of Napoleon's symbolic withdrawal, if his decision to appear in public less frequently with the bicorn was calculated or subconscious. Some say he feared becoming a caricature. Others insist he was merely preparing for a transition, one where memory replaced presence. But the troops? They notice. And they talk. Where's the hat? Is he sick? Is it a message? Is it war again? A corporal even sketches a cartoon, a sad hat sitting on a throne, surrounded by confused bayonets and crying medals. It circulates the camp like wildfire, until Napoleon catches sight of it. He doesn't punish the artist. He just laughs once. At least it has my posture. Still, he calls for the hat the next morning. Not for a parade. Not for an address. But for a walk. You trail him through the woods outside Dresden, boots crunching frostbitten leaves. No guard. No ministers. Just the two of you and a hat that once commanded continents. After some time, he speaks. Did I ever tell you why I chose this shape? You shake your head. Everyone thinks it's to stand out, he says. So they could see me in battle. That's true. But not the whole truth. He stops. Brushes some pine needles from the brim. When I was a boy, I watched Corsican farmers shade their eyes with wide straw hats. No nobility. Just practicality. So this is your tribute? My camouflage, he says. Let the kings wear diamonds. I wear something useful. He tosses a pebble into the underbrush. It thumps dully, ignored. Funny, isn't it? The world saw a symbol. I saw shade. You nod, unsure what to say. Then he turns. And now I wonder, do I disappear without it? You want to say no. You want to say he's more than the hat. But you hesitate. Because it's not a question for you. It's for himself. Back at quarters you find him sketching. He calls the collection Les Silhouettes Perdues. The Lost Shapes. Sends it to the Imperial Library under a pseudonym. You think that'll be the last of it. But one day, he brings it out again. The hat. The real one. Not for politics. Not for power. For a portrait. A final one. The painter, a young woman from Geneva, asks for quiet as she works. Her brush is fast but gentle. She captures him not at his desk, not on a horse, but sitting, leaning forward slightly. Hat on his knee. No medals. No throne. Just a man, thinking. It's the first portrait to show the hat not on him, but with him. As if to say, we've walked together far enough. When it's done, she signs the corner. No name. Just a date. And a single word, Fini. The painting hangs briefly in the palace before being quietly packed away. Napoleon doesn't speak of it again. But you find him standing before it one last time. Hat in hand. Whispering something too soft to hear. Perhaps goodbye. Perhaps just thank you. Later, he jokes about commissioning a wax replica of the hat to be buried with him. You don't laugh. Because you're not sure he's joking. And neither is the hat. It rests now in a small case, wrapped in silk, tucked inside a carved wooden box labeled with a single phrase, for peace. Not to be worn. Not again. But always remembered. The box is never far. It travels now, tucked discreetly into the same carriage as Napoleon's maps and telescopes, resting in the corner like a sleeping cat no one dares disturb. No one speaks of it aloud. Not even you. But everyone knows. They see the change. The way Napoleon moves now, less with thunder, more with gravity. His strides still carry command, but they land softer, like he's learned that the earth doesn't always need to be conquered. Sometimes it just needs to be noticed. And the hat, slumbering in its wooden nest, watches all of it silently. You're passing through Bavaria again. The same cobblestone town where, months ago, villagers tossed petals and potatoes in equal measure. This time, there are no cheers. Just curious glances from behind cracked shutters. Napoleon steps out briefly, speaks with the mayor, nods once. Then he's back in the carriage before the snow has a chance to settle on his shoulders. The soldiers murmur more than they used to. Some think he's aging faster. Others whisper he's plotting something enormous. One optimist insists he's becoming enlightened. You're not so sure. What you do know is this: he's never seemed more aware of his place in history. And that awareness is heavy. He doesn't wear the hat anymore. But he still touches the box. Sometimes at night. Once, you pass his cabin door and catch the flicker of candlelight glinting off the polished wood. He's sitting beside it, running his fingers along its grain. He speaks softly, to no one in particular. They won't remember the weight of it. Only the shadow. In the morning, he acts as though it never happened. There's a campaign forming. You feel it in the crispness of orders, the tightening of routines. Poland again, or Russia maybe. No one's quite certain. But the hat, though boxed silent, seems to lean toward the horizon like it knows. And that's when the rumors begin. Someone claims to have seen him wearing it again, late at night, walking the edge of camp. Another swears he caught sight of the brim in silhouette against the tent wall. The cook says he saw Napoleon brushing it with a horsehair comb, murmuring numbers like spells. Historians still argue whether the hat ever came out again in battle after Dresden. At a small garrison near the Elbe, you find Napoleon writing by lantern light. Parchment after parchment. Letters not to marshals or kings, but to artists. Architects. Librarians. He's planning a museum. Not just in Paris. One in every major city he's ever occupied. They'll need more than statues, he says. They'll need stories. And then he gestures to the box. That too. One day. You raise an eyebrow. The real one? He shrugs. Maybe a replica. Let the real one sleep. He means it. Something about legacy is changing in him. He's no longer just collecting victories. He's curating remembrance. One evening, during a pause outside Leipzig, he opens the box. Not to wear the hat. Not to hold it. Just to look. You're sitting nearby, cleaning your boots, trying not to seem like you're watching. He doesn't move for a full 5 minutes. Then he closes it. Gently. Like tucking in an old friend. It was always too tight, he says. But it made me taller. You smile. Still does. Later that night, one of the young aides draws something in his notebook and passes it to you. It's a caricature. Napoleon shaking hands with a giant hat that has arms and eyes and a diplomatic sash. Underneath it reads, Treaty of Silhouette. You try not to laugh. Too hard. But the truth is, it's accurate. Because more and more, Napoleon isn't just the man with the hat. He's the man who used to be the man with the hat. And that space in between, the memory, the myth, that's where he's living now. And you? You start to dream in shapes. Sometimes, it's the outline of a bicorn casting a shadow across Europe. Sometimes, it's the hat sitting on an empty throne. Sometimes, it's just floating down a river like a forgotten letter. In one dream, you're in a room of mirrors, like the one Napoleon described in Berlin, and each reflection shows a different leader, a different posture. But only one wears the hat. And he's the only one walking forward. You wake with a strange sense of gratitude. Because you were there. You saw the tilt. Felt the weight. Heard the soft thump as it landed on desks before history happened. The hat was never magic. But it mattered. And it still does. One morning, as snow gives way to wet spring, you find a package on your cot. A small box. Inside, carefully folded, a piece of dark felt. A scrap of lining. And a note in Napoleon's handwriting. For when you need to be seen. You press the fabric to your palm. It's warm from memory. And heavier than you'd expect. The rain comes suddenly. Not the soft, cinematic drizzle that poets love, but a cold slap of weather that soaks through uniforms and turns roads into soup. And in the middle of it, you find yourself crouched under a sagging canvas beside the box. Yes, that box. Rain beads and rolls off its waxed wood like the heavens themselves refuse to touch what's inside. It's absurd, really. How many hands have tried to claim empires, and here you are, protecting a hat from weather like it's a newborn kitten. Napoleon's nowhere in sight just yet. His tent is lit, but still, he hasn't emerged. You wait. It's quiet in that way that only happens when the world's wet and waiting. A kind of suspended breath. Then he steps out. No hat. Not even the military one. Just hair, matted with rain, flattened like an exclamation mark, not with ceremony. Not for an audience. Just because. And in that moment, lightning flashes. You swear it freezes time. There's no crowd, no cannon fire, no march. Just a man in a storm, standing upright, facing forward with felt on his head and silence in his heart. Let's go, he says. Where? Forward. The next few days are a blur of rivers and orders, of maps smudged with rain and boots heavy with mud. Napoleon is suddenly everywhere. Inspecting regiments. Speaking with quartermasters. Walking into towns like he owns the pavement. And always, the hat is back. He doesn't wear it constantly, but when he does, the effect is electric. Like striking a flint near dry parchment. Soldiers straighten. Officers stop fidgeting. Even the horses seem to walk smarter. You hear whispers again. It's back. He's back. Some call it superstition. Others call it leadership. You call it theater. Brilliant, necessary theater. Because in a world that forgets faces quickly, it's the silhouettes that endure. One afternoon, in a small village market, a child spots him from afar. Gasps. Tugs at her mother's sleeve. Mama, look! The Hat Man! Napoleon hears. Glances over. Offers a tight smile. Later, in private, you tease him. Hat Man? It's better than Corsican Menace, he says. Or the Little General. He lifts the brim of the hat slightly. I'll take Hat Man. Historians still argue whether this reappearance of the hat was a conscious return to form or an emotional relapse. Was it strategy? Nostalgia? Desperation? One theory claims he wore it because he feared fading. Another suggests he wore it simply because it fit best. But you? You saw the way he looked at it. It wasn't fear. It was reunion. At a campfire that night, a young drummer offers a toast, though all he has is stale tea and half a biscuit. To the hat that wins wars. Everyone chuckles. Napoleon, sipping his own tea, raises his cup. To the people who make it worth wearing. Cue more chuckles. A smattering of claps. But after they disperse, he turns to you. I meant that. You nod. He points to the hat, now resting on his knee. This never fought a battle. It only witnessed them. But sometimes, witnessing is enough. You both sit in silence, the fire crackling like it agrees. Over the next week, the hat becomes more than a symbol again. It becomes a participant. You see him tip it forward when listening intently. Tilt it back when musing aloud. Even spin it slowly on one finger when annoyed, an unspoken I'm thinking signal that aides quickly learn to respect. At one border village, a local seamstress begs to repair a fraying edge. Napoleon declines. Every thread has a story. I'm not editing the past. Instead, he lets it fray. Lets it soften more. He stopped preserving it like a relic. Now he's letting it live again. One morning, after a particularly long march, you find him asleep in a chair, head tilted back, hat pulled low over his eyes. It looks like something from a painting. Peaceful. Heroic. Slightly ridiculous. You drape a blanket over him and whisper to the hat. Don't let him dream too big. But you know he will. He always does. Later, when asked by a foreign officer why he insists on wearing something so outdated, Napoleon simply says, because the future is still catching up to me. You resist the urge to groan. But secretly, he stares at the horizon, where snow begins to fall in slow, drifting flecks. If I fall, he says, do me one favor? You nod. Don't let it end up in a museum. He grins. Or worse, an auction. You promise. And though you know history rarely keeps its promises, you mean it. Because you're not just guarding a hat anymore. You're guarding the memory of a man who changed the world in shadows and shapes. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. The snow deepens. It doesn't fall, it settles. A quiet siege of white that builds on rooftops, softens wagon wheels, buries fences and firewood alike. You ride with the army now in muffled silence, every hoof step absorbed into a frozen hush. And as you crest the hill just outside Vilnius, you glimpse Napoleon at the front of the line. The hat is back on. It rises like a flag over his silhouette, black felt against the pale sky, unmistakable. Some part of you had expected him to leave it boxed again. Maybe even buried somewhere back in Dresden, under an invented tree with a fake plaque reading "Here lies all that was necessary." But no. Here it is. Alive and very much on duty. No one cheers. Not in this cold. But soldiers elbow each other, nod toward the front. Morale shifts, just slightly. Like a thaw you can't quite feel yet, but know is coming. And when the wind whips down from the steps, you watch him tilt the hat just so, as if defying the entire northern sky with the crease of a brim. If it flies off, he mutters, "Don't chase it. It's had a good run." You grin? But you're already calculating wind speed and chase angles. Because if it does fly off, there's no way you're letting it tumble into obscurity like an old scarf. Later, around a hastily built fire in the ruins of a barn, he holds the hat close, inspecting a new scuff on the underside. "A gift from Lithuania," he says dryly. "Maybe it's lucky. I think I've already had my share of luck." There's a pause. Now I need memory. He doesn't mean nostalgia. He means collective memory. The kind you wear. The kind that makes people say, "That man is history," even before it's written. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's decision to wear the hat during the Russian campaign was strategic or sentimental. Some point to correspondence hinting at superstition. Others believe it was simply too cold not to. A fringe theory claims he wore it to be easier to spot in snowstorms, a visual North Star for retreating soldiers. But if that's true, it worked. Because retreat comes quickly. And brutally. You remember the crunch of ice under boots that once marched triumphantly. The way bread turns to stone in your hands. The way men start talking to their socks like old friends. Napoleon never falters outwardly. But his voice thins. His orders get shorter. The hat remains. More than once, you find him using it like a signal, tipping it forward when he's angry, pressing it down when it's time to move. It becomes semaphore in a world without flags. In Smolensk, as frost creeps across cannon barrels, he hands you the box. "Keep it close." You blink. "Now?" "Just in case." And so the hat returns to its cocoon. Not in defeat, but in preservation. Because even as men fall and wagons collapse and bonfires become rarer than prayers, he knows that losing the hat would feel like losing control. But here's what surprises you. The box isn't sealed for long. A few days later, under skies that resemble old bruises, he reclaims it. Dusts it gently with a corner of his scarf. Places it back on his head. And walks. Just walks. No guards. No carriage. Just boots on snow and a hat announcing itself with every gust of wind. You follow. Of course, he just nods once. "Get up. We're not done." And in that moment, you understand something. It's not the hat that makes him visible. It's the way he refuses to vanish. He keeps walking. Keeps commanding. Keeps shaping morale from cloth and presence and posture. And each time the wind tugs at that brim, he tightens his jaw as if daring it to try again. By the time you reach the Niemen River, the army is a ghost of its former self. But the hat? It's still sharp. Still defiant. Still, somehow clean. A miracle, or perhaps just the kind of attention Napoleon never stopped giving to his image. On the final night before the river crossing, you find him speaking softly to it. No poetry. No final speech. Just, "You've done your part. Let's get home." And then, just before dawn, as the mist coils around the trees and the ice crackles beneath wagon wheels, he lifts the hat one more time. Wears it like armor. Crosses the river. And leaves Russia behind. You don't know it then, but this will be the last true campaign the hat ever marches in. The last time it sees battle smoke and frozen rivers and soldiers mistaking history for routine. And as you ride behind him, following the same silhouette you followed across continents, you think, it's never really been about the hat. It's been about the man who made it matter. But the hat, bless it, kept showing up anyway. It endured. Even when boots cracked. Even when morale shattered. Even when maps became riddles and warmth became myth, it endured. And so did he. For now, Paris greets you with smoke and softness. Not battlefield smoke, no, something gentler. Chimney curls and bakery puffs, the scent of roasting chestnuts mingling with the sharp chill of early spring. You've returned from ice and ghosts and silence to a city that still believes in conversation. Napoleon enters without flourish. No parades, no music, no wreaths. Just wheels rolling over wet cobblestones and the creak of a carriage that's seen too much. Inside that carriage, tucked beside his side satchel, is the box. The hat remains nestled inside, hidden from view. Untouched since the river. As if its work is paused, not finished, just on intermission. He steps out wearing nothing more than a simple overcoat and his bare head. The onlookers frown. A few confused murmurs ripple through the gathered crowd. Where's the hat? He's not wearing the hat. Maybe it's a new era. Napoleon hears it, of course. He hears everything. But he keeps walking. Up the steps of the Tuileries. Past golden-framed paintings of older kings who died fat and adorned. No one stops him. He reaches his study, waits until the door is shut behind him, then unlocks the box. Inside, the hat rests like a sleeping animal, curved slightly from travel but otherwise unchanged. You expect him to wear it. He doesn't. He just lifts it and sets it on his desk, front and center, like a second face waiting to finish the sentence. They're watching, he says, not looking at you. Always, you reply. Good. A pause. Let them wonder when I'll put it back on. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's decision to leave the hat off during his return to Paris was symbolic or circumstantial. Some claim it was a gesture of humility, an olive branch to a wary public. Others believe it was tactical. By appearing unadorned, he showed he was still a man of the people. Or perhaps it was a power move. The kind that says, I don't need the symbol anymore. I am the symbol. But behind closed doors, you see the truth. He's unsure. Not of power, but of permanence. The snow of Russia still clings to his boots, even here in Paris. The silence of retreat is louder than applause. And though the hat sits there, familiar, loyal, he hesitates. They expect something of me, he mutters. They always have. No. You wear something long enough, they stop seeing you. So take it off. And then what? You have no answer. That night the salons whisper. Journalists scribble. Political cartoons emerge by morning. One particularly clever drawing shows a throne with the caption, reserved for His Hatness. Napoleon sees it over breakfast. He doesn't smile, but he doesn't scowl either. It's a compliment you offer. It's an epitaph, he replies. But he doesn't throw it away. Instead, he pins it to his wall, next to a map of France. The days pass in quiet decisions. Trade agreements. Military reforms. Treaties held together with string and charm. Yet the question everyone keeps asking, publicly and in private, is the same. Will he rise again? Is the hat coming back? As if the two are the same. One afternoon, a seamstress arrives with an offer, a redesigned bicorn, slimmer, more modern. Silk-threaded, lined in satin. She beams with pride. Napoleon barely glances at it. Elegant, he says. But no. Why not? Because I've already been who I need to be. She leaves deflated, but not angry. There's a strange comfort in the refusal, like hearing your father say he prefers his old boots. You understand it even if you don't agree. You find the hat later that evening, moved slightly on the desk. Tilted just a little, like it had tried to adjust itself. Or maybe you imagine that. You hope you did. Because if it can move, well, then this whole thing is stranger than you thought. The truth is, it feels alive now. Not haunted, not enchanted. Just aware. Like it knows it's waiting. And so is he. The following week, an artist visits. Commissioned by the ministry to sketch Napoleon for a new coin design. The artist brings props, laurel wreaths, sashes, scrolls. Napoleon waves them off. Sketch the hat. Only the hat? Only the hat. But what of your face? They know it. And your posture? The hat is my posture. The artist doesn't argue. Just sketches. Carefully. Reverently. And when the print is unveiled a month later, a simple silhouette of the bicorn, no face, no title, the public is baffled. And intrigued. What does it mean? Is he returning? Or is he retiring? Napoleon doesn't explain. And that's the genius of it. Because the hat, once a fixture, is now a riddle. And riddles are more powerful than declarations. One evening, as dusk softens the world into velvet and fog, he finds you reading beside the fire. He sits. The hat rests between you. He picks it up. Balances it on one knee. Stares at it for a long time. There will be one more campaign, he says. You look up. War? Of a kind. And will you wear it? He smiles. Only if I have to. You nod. Because you understand. The hat isn't just an accessory anymore. It's a consequence. And sometimes, consequences wait in wooden boxes beside empires and tea. The last campaign begins not with a battle cry, but a whisper. Not even a dramatic whisper, just quiet urgency packed into a dozen telegrams and one early morning knock. Napoleon's exile to Elba had come and gone like an awkward houseguest, necessary, unsatisfying, temporary. And now he was back, not through force, but presence. The way a shadow reappears when you light a candle in a locked room. You're there when he opens the trunk. Not the maps. Not the medals. The one with the hat. It doesn't glow. It doesn't hum. But you swear the room feels more awake once he lifts the lid. He doesn't hesitate this time. He reaches, word spreads faster than horses now. Napoleon marches north. The king flees. Towns open their gates. Soldiers peel away from the royal army to rejoin their emperor, not because of strategy, but silhouette. Because the man in the bicorn is walking again. That familiar figure against the dawn. That sharp-cornered shadow stepping back into myth. And everywhere you go, it's the same murmur. He's wearing the hat. He's really back. He's not done. Historians still argue whether this was theatrical brilliance, or a masterstroke of psychological warfare. Some say Napoleon knew the people didn't need speeches, they needed signs. Others think he simply couldn't resist old habits. But none of that matters when you reach Waterloo. Ah yes. That field. Green and wide and already soaked in ghosts before the first musket fires. Napoleon arrives in silence. No flags yet. No cheers. Just the crunch of soil under boot and the familiar tilt of his brim. He surveys the horizon. Then the sky. Then the men. And finally you. It'll be short. Will it be sweet? Only for one of us. He smiles. But you both know what's coming. And still, he wears it. All day. Under cannon smoke and hail. Through commands barked over the roar of horse hooves. In the thick of it, when aides are falling and morale stutters like a broken drum, you glimpse him standing still, just for a heartbeat. Back straight. Face unreadable. Hat perfectly angled. And for that single moment, he is the empire. No medals. No crown. Just the curve of his silhouette and the certainty it carries. It doesn't last, of course. Battles don't care about posture. By nightfall, the tide has turned. Blucher arrives. Booths sink deeper. Maps become mud-smeared confessions. And still, he doesn't remove the hat. Even as defeat closes in like a cold fog, it stays with him. Steady. Dignified. Defiant. In the end, there's no dramatic gesture. No final toss of felt to the wind. He simply steps back. Finds the small rise where his carriage waits. And sits. The hat still on his head. Well, he says. That's that. Is it? For now. The rain begins again. Soft at first, then persistent. You reach up, thinking he'll want to protect the hat. But he shakes his head. Let it feel something real. You sit beside him. Say nothing. Eventually, he removes it. cradles it like an old friend who's finally tired. Do you think it knew? You raise a brow. The hat? That this was our last. I think it was waiting to find out. He nods. Fair. Back in Paris, everything is motion. Courts. Papers. Plans. Ships. But in his quarters it's still. The hat lies on a table, drying. He doesn't box it this time. Doesn't frame it. Just lets it rest. You find him watching it one morning. I thought about leaving it behind. Why didn't you? Because it wouldn't leave me. He chuckles. We're stitched together now. Seams and all? Especially the seams. In the weeks that follow, as the walls close in and the exile solidifies, he refuses all offers of new uniforms or regal trappings. I've worn my legacy already. And it still fits? Only where it counts. When the time comes, and they ask what personal effects he'll take with him to St. Helena, his list is short. A few books. A telescope. And, of course, the hat. No one dare, because there's nothing left to say. The next time the world sees him, it will be through etchings and faded memories. But always, always, with that shape. That line. That soft curve of history worn slightly to the left. And the last you see of him is a silhouette disappearing into the fog, one hand resting lightly on the brim, as if guiding it home. You never unpack the hat. It stays in its traveling case, tucked into a modest armoire in the small, sea-salted house on St. Helena. Wrapped in the same dark cloth. Resting on the same velvet cradle. But now the room is quieter. Not the silence of battle pause, but the hush of final chapters. Napoleon moves more slowly these days. No armies to inspect. No diplomats to flatter or threaten. No nations balanced precariously on his schedule. Just the occasional letter. A chess game. A cough that lingers longer than it should. And still, the hat waits. You think about bringing it out. Placing it nearby as he reads. Letting it breathe the ocean air like it used to breathe cannon smoke. But he never asks. And you've learned to follow his silences as much as his commands. He sits outside most afternoons now, gazing toward the horizon like it owes him an explanation. Sometimes he sketches. Sometimes he hums. Once, you catch him tracing the shape of the hat on the tabletop with his finger, slowly, absent-mindedly. Do you miss it? You finally ask one evening. The world? The hat. He laughs, not bitterly. Fondly. Some days I think it misses me more. Historians still argue what happened to the hat in exile. Did he wear it again? Did it sit beside his bed like a loyal hound? Some journals claim he used it as a paperweight. Others say he gifted it to a guard, quietly, as a joke. A few think he burned it, to make sure no museum ever got to cage it. None of those stories are yours. You know exactly where it is. And so does he. One night, after an unusually long walk around the grounds, he stops at the armoire. Stares. Doesn't move. Just says, "Let's look at it." You open the case gently. The hinges whisper open. Inside, the hat lies unchanged. Napoleon reaches out. Hesitates. Then lifts it. Not like a relic. Like a memory. He sets it on the table between you both. It was never about vanity. I know. It was armor. And a crown. And shade. Don't forget the shade. You both smile. Then he picks it up. Places it on his head. It's loose now. He's lost weight. Still it fits. At least in spirit. I always thought I'd die wearing this. Would you like to? He considers the question more seriously than you expect. Then shakes his head. No. Let it live longer than me. And so, the hat comes off again. For the final time. He strokes its side once, then returns it to the box. Not hurried. Not dramatic. Just done. The days shorten. He sleeps more. Talks less. But every so often, you catch him glancing toward the armoire. Like checking on an old friend. One morning, you wake to a quiet knock at your door. A steward, pale and blinking in the light, whispers the words you knew were coming. Napoleon has passed. Not in battle. Not on a throne. In bed, surrounded by stillness. He was 51. You walk to the armoire. Open it. The hat is there. Waiting. It feels strange to touch it without him alive to nod in approval. Like you're borrowing something sacred. But you do. You carry it into collector's whisper offers in drawing rooms. You say no. Always no. Because some silhouettes belong only to the shadows they cast. And as you grow older, your dreams change. No more battles. No more frostbitten marches. Just the soft image of a hat resting on a desk. A gentle slope of felt. A familiar tilt. As if it's waiting for its wearer to walk in and say, one more campaign. Just one more. But he never does. And the hat never asks. Eventually you pass on too. Quietly. Without ceremony. But in your will, a single request is made. That the hat be buried, not displayed. Not auctioned. Not passed down as a novelty. Buried in a wooden box, unmarked, beneath a small tree on a windswept hill. And so it is. One last journey. No crowds. No speeches. Just earth, returning something precious to the silence from which it came. And as the soil falls, slow and rhythmic, you imagine the whisper of felt against time. Not an ending. A pause. Because someday, someone will hear the story again. See a shadow at the edge of a painting. Ask, was that him? Was that the hat? And whether it was or not, it won't matter. Because the shape remains. And so does the memory. And now, the hat sleeps. Beneath a patch of grass swaying in the ocean breeze, tucked far from parade grounds and palace halls, it rests, quiet, undisturbed, and finally free from expectation. The wind rustles the leaves above, not unlike the cheer of distant crowds, but gentler now, softer, the kind that lulls rather than stirs. You imagine the felt growing warm in the soil, its fibers no longer shaped by battle plans or strategy, but by roots that press gently, patiently. Time, in all its weight, becomes something feather-light here. Every gust of wind is a sigh. Every creak of the branches overhead is a fading memory being rocked to sleep. There's no longer any need for tilts or angles or the drama of silhouettes. Only stillness. Only space. And you feel your own breath slowing, like the world around you has exhaled all at once, releasing the years, the myths, the symbols. You don't need to remember every date, every decision. All that matters now is the shape you carried in your heart, the curve, the shadow, the hush that followed its final bow. So let your shoulders drop. Let your thoughts drift gently with the leaves. Let the image of that worn black hat, resting peacefully beneath the stars, carry you softly into slumber. No more campaigns. No more questions. Only rest. Only quiet. Only dreams.